an International Workstar 7400 Maxxforce 10. I'm going to be changing this guy right here, coming off the high pressure oil pump. I actually don't know if the line itself is different, but there is an updated kit for this if you have the updated oil pump. If you do not have the updated oil pump, you do not need the kit. The kit will come with some extra fittings. Come with, I believe, they're calling them 70 degrees, and it'll come with 190. And the kit comes with those, but you need to be careful of the bore size of these. You can see that that's clearly a different size than that. This is not the updated piece. They sent us the updated piece, but we didn't have the updated pump, so I'm going to try and walk you through it. First, we're going to pull off this air box and the whole intake tube up there so we can gain access to in here. We'll pull this fender off. I think I can get to it without taking this fender off, so we'll just take this one off for now. As you can see, mine's leaking from up here out of the head pretty good, and this line is got a little sheet over it. It's braided, still braided, comes down behind the fuel filter, comes down into this fitting. This is where your 90-degree fitting is. Up here is going to be, they call it your 70, and when you pull them off, you need to check the bores if you're going to be changing the fittings. In order to pull this hose off is actually pretty simple if you're just changing the hose, but if you've got to change the fittings, that fitting up there, it's a pain to get to, but you can get to it from up in between here, as you can see. But down here, if you need to pull this one off, from right here, because the way the fitting is designed, you actually have to take off part of the fuel line. So hold on here. So you've got this line right here. That's got to come off, comes down here. There's 3 bolts holding this little piece on. I believe they're 8mm. And there's just an O-ring in there that you can reuse. And then that line comes around along here and comes back up onto the back side of the fuel filter housing. I believe it's right here. There's a thing on the other side that you can actually get to pretty easily. Right here. Right, that piece, take that off, and you're able to spin that fitting around. Because it's a 90, it's got to go all the way down, and that thing's in the way. So once you can pull that out, you can spin this out of the way. You're going to want a 1 1/16 wrench to pull the fitting nut loose. It's a pretty thin one. I actually had to buy a set. I'll see if I can post it in the comments of the set I bought. You'll usually find this connector zip tied onto here somewhere. You're going to want to take this connector off of this harness, not the connector, but unbolt this screw so you can move the harness. Same with follow this up here, and there's another nut on the back side of this. I think it's a 13mm. Pull that just so you can move the harness. I usually unplug this just so I don't hit it. It gives me that much more extra play as it comes into this little harness. It just makes it easier for me to take this. 1 on the bottom, 2 on the top. Once you get that harness out of the way, pull it off of here, and then unplug down here, unscrewed right here. You can usually get it up out of the way. I've got it just bungeed up. But then you can get in on that nut. You can kind of see it. That's the bottom of the line that comes into this fitting right here. And you're going to need a 1 1/4 on the line nut. But this lets you kind of get to it. You do have rags. You're going to spill a lot of oil. It just drains basically everything out of that head, out of this line. So I've got just your basic 1 1/4 wrench. I do have a thin wrench I'll probably end up using, but you can do it with this. Just a little harder. Get in there. Crank get that guy loose. I think you're able to get them loose enough that you can start to possibly do it by finger. It's also quite a messy job. Yeah, so see, I can do it by finger now. Get that unscrewed. Doesn't mean you're going to be able to, because I think it's obviously not in the greatest spot. You can tell it's getting a little tight. Could be my harness in the way, so I'll move the harness back out of the way and undo that line, get some rags under there, and then I'll be able to get this guy. You can see those 3 bolts. Usually I'll take this guy off first so I can get a rag in there so no oil falls into there or debris. Give you an idea here of I just have basically an 8mm straight shot. Should be able to get to it with as long as the harness is out of the way. Kind of just get in there, get on there. I'll have to stop it so I can get 2 hands on that. We're gonna come up to these fuel lines. This one on the front of the engine is gonna be a, what was that, 13/16. We're gonna crack that one loose, and then on the other side over here, that line is a 3/4. One's a little harder to take off because it's got a little nylon piece in it, but it comes on and off. You are gonna spill a little fuel on your down, so make sure you got something on the ground or some gloves if you don't want the diesel on you. Mine was on there pretty tight, so if you get a secondary wrench on this one is 3/4, that's 13/16. Once you crack it loose, should be able to just, yeah, come right off. Might actually be easier to do these ones first and keep that bottom section a little more plugged in so it's a little more rigid of line, not as wobbly. I'll go ahead and get my 3/4 on that, take that off. Got that line loose in, this line loose in. And as long as you got that piece underplugged, I believe you can basically pull the whole thing out. There we go. Spill a little fuel coming out of that housing. Now you've got that out. Oh, you can move this piece out a little bit. In fact, I think you might. Well, you can pull it all the way out. It's a little tricky, but as long as these things are all out of the way, you get it. You can see there's a, get in there, there's an O-ring right here. Make sure that's in decent condition. I like to stick a rag of some sort in there. See that little piece? So now we can, now once we get this line off, this fitting, because it's a right angle, rotates around, and see it would hit the top of this. That was the first issue I had when I very first did this. I took it all off and realized I'd take that off, all this spilling oil everywhere. So usually on most of these lines, once you crack them loose, for the most part, you should be able to do it. But on a line that might be old and rusty, this is very time consuming, getting a wrench and basically flipping it every time you gotta do it. This line is also extremely stiff, so once you even get towards a little bit, it gets a little even harder. Usually I'll take 2 hands or even a wrench a little more. I don't know if I can get this to stay in there very well, probably not, but we're gonna take this top one off first and get a hose and grab. I'll put the little covers that I've got that came with the new ones. I'll grab one of these guys and throw it on top of there so it doesn't leak as much oil all at once. So, got that line off. Comes down into there. You can see that's your 90 coming out of there. I've got it angled just a little bit. That's the old one. So we're gonna pull this one off, and you get it by coming up in between here with a 1/1/16. You can come down in here, and you can get on it just right there and loosen that nut, and then the whole thing should just spin. So we cracked that loose. It's pretty tight. Just unscrew that enough, and then this piece will just unscrew. It's gonna leak some oil out, so get yourself a rag under there because it just leaks all onto that manifold, or that intake right there, as you can see. Try to catch some of it so I don't make too much of a mess. Okay, so there's the one we pulled out. This is the original one. This one came with this one in the updated kit, if you have the updated kit. And I ordered another new one for the old high pressure kit. So you actually measure them on this little piece right above the O-ring, right here, not this upper one, this lower one. So when I measure down here, it should be like 0.66, yeah. And then the thinner ones will be a 0.60, I believe. That one might be a right size. So here's the thinner one, which I had on, yeah, so 0.60 inches. Obviously we pulled the O-rings off of that one, so we won't use it. And then this is your biggest one, 0.66. And that's the new one that we've ordered for this. As you can see, a bunch of oil. I tried to stick something in there to hold it and slow it down. Got this piece, keep the black cap up on here. When you put it in, that will should hold the oil. You're getting this, and you're gonna put it in so it faces pretty much straight forward and perfectly flat, if I remember right. So we'll go ahead and screw this all the way in, and then once we get it in, we'll screw that piece in, and we'll leave it loose, because on this one you can actually tighten once you get the line on and situated. You can retighten this and adjust this, the main housing piece. So when putting this piece in, this actually, the housing, focus on it, will actually stop and point about, it stops at about between like 1 and 3 o'clock up there. So you actually have to come back and have it face at about the 9 o'clock, and then I just kind of hand tight snug that so that when I put the line on, I can adjust that and then tighten it as needed. We're gonna head down to this one down in here now and take that off and check the bore size on that. So this is where it's nice to have the thin wrench, because you've got to fit, if you've got a thinner wrench, I should say, because you've got to fit right in between here for that nut. And they're really, unless you're taking off this fuel filter housing, this whole housing right here to take it off, I actually don't know what it calls for, but so thin wrench to loosen and tighten that nut as needed. And also once the line's on, it's even harder to get back into that piece to snug it up, because this one is the finicky one to get lined up with the hose, because that hose is so stiff too. I actually ended up having to get my big wrench out to crack that loose, but it fit in there when the line's not there. So this should just turn, you spill a little oil, just what's in the cap. Probably wouldn't hurt to put one of those caps on top of it. Just unscrew this bad boy. We'll see if it was the right one or not when we got him. Okay. So, this is the original. Well, this is ordered for the original, for the non-updated. This was the updated one that I got originally, and this is the old one. I ended up putting new O-rings on it, and that's why one of these ones over here is missing O-rings, because I put on that. So this is the one that came off originally. As you can tell, it's got that 0.669. This is the one that came with the updated kit, and yeah. So I actually put that one on first, not looking at it, because it was the only 90-degree angle one that came with it.
and we didn't know how to update the kit, so make sure you ask for that, because they did not ask us if it was an updated high pressure pump, oil pump. So I ended up just kind of rebuilding this one. So now that I've got the new one right here, we'll reuse this one and stick it in. And once again, when you pull this off, it's going to leak oil, not as much as the head is, but make sure you lube those things up pretty good.
So similar to the one up top, focus on this, you can see that when you tighten it, I'm looking straight down, it's facing it about 5, 6 o'clock. So this will actually need to be turned up and angled just slightly, so like it's a 1 or 2 o'clock. But see, you can't, once you get that line on here, you can't get a wrench in here to tighten this. You might be able to get a crowfoot. You got a 1/16 crowfoot in here, come in there and tighten it. I don't have one of those. I actually ordered the thin wrench just for this job, but crow's foot, the non-pipe style would be perfect for that. So we'll get these all snugged up, and then I'll get the line kind of lined up, and we'll get that on. So this is the whole reason for the thin wrench, or I guess you could, or crow's foot, is because you can see how little space there is. So that is my thin wrench. So even when this thing is turned at its widest amount, you can fit down in there, but you can't do that with a regular wrench. You could still get in there with a crow's foot, get that harness out of the way, and come in right here, and that'd be a good idea too, probably easier. So, too hard to get a camera set up to do this two hands, so I'll just kind of give you an idea what we're gonna do here. So I've got the line, I've got it basically hand tight onto here, I've got everything on here hand tight. It's snug, more or less, because once you put it on, you can really just spin this whole piece like that. And that kind of just, that'll tighten it, because the hose, this you can see spins separately, so you're gonna get about a snug. This is a 1 1/8, I think, and a 1 1/4. So you're basically just gonna kind of force this down. It's stiff, and you're gonna try to line it up the best you can, thread it onto this piece, all while oil is pouring out, and get it on straight. So you usually have one hand holding back here, kind of keeping it straight, while the other hand's trying to sit here and twist this thing on. It's a party. So I don't have it on yet. I've had to move this a little bit to kind of just try and see if I can't get this angled right. She's going on, and it's kind of stiff, so you got to sit there and shake the wire the whole time you're doing this, or shake the hose, sorry. So I'm just kind of shaking the hose back here on the back side while I turn this by finger. This will take forever by wrench. Get that on for you. So that's basically snug there. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to tighten this. If the hose back here is turning while you're tightening this, you'll want to hold the hose, just because you don't want this rotating on that O-ring in there, which hopefully is lubed enough that it'll slide along. But so tighten this, and then once you get this tight on the top and tighten the bottom, then you can come back up to these nuts. You probably don't need a thin wrench on the top one out of the head, but you do out of the bottom one, or the crow's foot like I was talking about earlier. Trying to get in there. I don't need a thin wrench for this piece, but this wrench is a lot thinner. It's easier to get in there and tighten it, and then I'll do an overall tighten with my bigger wrench. So got that on. This one, to really get this one snug, you end up having to tighten that the hold down nut to be able to get that snug, unless you can get a wrench on that, on the actual elbow. to kind of hold it up while you tighten it down. But as you can see, it sits just below the cooler, doesn't touch anything. Comes down, and you can see how that's not quite straight, but you can see how you need a thin wrench, or I'm just trying to see so you can kind of like move this harness out of the way and come in through the side and get at that with a crowfoot. So probably my next purchase is the XL crowfoots. So problem is, just to check this dang thing, now you got to put all that fuel line back on. So on the lift pump here, this guy out of there. So now that you can see that 90 coming out of the oil pump, a little harder to get to that high pressure, or the lift pump bolts on that top left corner. As long as you've got a basic 8mm, I was originally using a mid-length, it should be able to get in there. Depending on where the camshaft sits, this piece may not just slide all the way in flush, so you got to kind of line it up and then slowly work those ways in, make sure it goes in, make sure the O-ring's still there. I have not hooked up any of the fuel lines on either side. I can do that after, because there's a little flexibility in those lines, and then just work yourself until they're snug, and that should get it in. After you get those fuel lines in front and back, obviously you can kind of check for some basic leaks and just pump this up. Let's see if you got anything leaking out. Check the O-ring on that piece when you're putting it back on. Make sure it's got a little lubrication on it so it doesn't get torn. Make sure it's there. On this one, it's not quite an O-ring, it's like a rubber insulator, I guess you could call it, but make sure it's in good condition. And then we'll get all our connectors back on, spray everything off, and we'll run it. Be careful of this line. This is a pretty fragile line when you're doing this job. Another reason why I unplug that, because I've been you have to stretch that if you don't pull that off. This comes off by pulling that yellow tab back as far as possible, and then you can see this piece just kind of pushes in just enough to pop up off of that hook. It's a little bugger, just patience.